Have you ever noticed something strange? The moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop explaining, the moment you stop begging to be valued, everything changes. Not because you've learned some secret dating trick, not because you've become cold, but because you finally started respecting yourself. Many men spend years believing that if they love harder, sacrifice more, text more, apologize more, or become more patient, eventually she'll realize their value. Sometimes that happens, but sometimes, the more you chase someone who doesn't value you, the less they appreciate everything you do. And the moment you finally choose yourself, that's when the dynamic completely changes. Not because you're trying to hurt her, not because you're playing games, but because people often don't recognize the value of something until it's no longer available. Today's video isn't about revenge, it isn't about manipulating women, and it certainly isn't about making someone suffer. It's about understanding human psychology. Because when someone repeatedly takes your effort for granted, walking away doesn't just protect your peace, it reminds you of your worth. Today you'll discover 7 psychological reasons why choosing yourself often becomes the moment everything changes. Stay until the end, because the final lesson isn't about relationships at all. It's about becoming the kind of man whose happiness never depends on someone else's approval. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week we explore psychology, masculinity, confidence, discipline, communication, self-improvement, and healthy relationships to help you become the strongest version of yourself. If that's your mission, you're in the right place. Now, let's begin. Reason number 1. People often notice value after losing easy access. Human psychology contains an interesting pattern. We adapt surprisingly fast to what becomes familiar. Think about the air conditioner in your room. After a few minutes, you barely notice it until it stops working. The same thing happens in many relationships. When one person constantly gives, always texts first, always apologizes, always fixes every disagreement, always sacrifices, eventually, their effort can begin to feel normal instead of valuable. Not because the other person is evil, but because familiarity reduces appreciation. Psychologists sometimes refer to this tendency as hedonic adaptation. People naturally become accustomed to positive things over time. That's why gratitude requires conscious effort. Imagine 2 different men. The first man constantly rearranges his entire life around someone who rarely appreciates him. He cancels plans with friends. He ignores his own goals. He answers every message within seconds. He tolerates disrespect because he's afraid of losing the relationship. His entire world slowly becomes centered around one person. The second man also cares deeply, but he values himself. He keeps working toward his goals. He spends time with family. He trains his body. He continues building his future. He gives love freely, but he never abandons himself in the process. Which man appears more emotionally stable? Which man seems more confident? The answer isn't about being emotionally unavailable. It's about balance. Healthy relationships require 2 complete people, not one person carrying the entire emotional weight. When someone no longer values your time, your kindness, or your effort, choosing to step back isn't punishment, it's perspective. Sometimes distance allows people to recognize what constant availability hid, and sometimes it reveals they never intended to appreciate it at all. Either outcome gives you clarity. That's why walking away isn't always about changing someone else's behavior. It's often about changing your own standards. Real confidence says, I will gladly give my love where it is appreciated, but I won't abandon myself trying to convince someone to value me. That single decision changes everything, because confidence begins the moment your self-worth stops depending on someone else's recognition. And that leads us to the second lesson, one that many men spend years learning the hard way. Reason number 2, stop chasing someone who has already stopped choosing you. One of the hardest truths about relationships is this. Effort cannot create mutual interest. You can send longer messages, plan better dates, buy thoughtful gifts, be more patient, apologize even when you weren't wrong, keep giving second chances, and still, you cannot force someone to value what they have already decided to overlook. Many men confuse persistence with love. They believe that if they just prove themselves a little more, she'll finally see what she's been missing. But healthy relationships aren't built on one person constantly trying to earn a place in someone else's life. They're built on 2 people choosing each other, again and again. Imagine watering a plant every single day. You give it sunlight. You protect it from the wind. You care for it with consistency. Now imagine that the plant isn't real. It's made of plastic. No matter how much effort you invest, nothing changes. Not because your effort lacks value, but because you're investing it in the wrong place. Relationships work the same way. Love grows where effort is mutual, not where one person is carrying the entire connection alone. This doesn't mean every relationship should end when things become difficult. Every healthy relationship goes through challenges. There will be misunderstandings, busy schedules, stress, moments when one partner needs more support than the other. That's normal. The difference is what happens over time. Do both people continue showing up? Do both people communicate honestly? Do both people take responsibility for their actions? Or does one person slowly become the only one trying? Confidence means recognizing the difference. It means asking yourself difficult questions. Am I feeling respected? Do my actions match my values? Am I staying because this relationship is healthy, or because I'm afraid of being alone? That last question changes everything. Fear often disguises itself as loyalty. We tell ourselves, if I leave, maybe I'll never find someone else. If I just try harder, things will go back to how they were. If I wait long enough, they'll change. Sometimes people do change. Sometimes relationships heal. But lasting change requires effort from both people, not hope from only one. One of the strongest signs of emotional maturity is knowing when to stop forcing what no longer flows naturally. Walking away isn't giving up on love. It's refusing to lose yourself while chasing someone who has stopped investing. And here's the irony. The energy you once spent chasing another person's approval can now be invested somewhere far more valuable. Your health, your discipline, your friendships, your career, your purpose, your peace. When your identity is no longer tied to one person's opinion, you become emotionally free, not because you stop caring, but because your happiness is no longer controlled by whether someone chooses you. Real confidence doesn't say, I need everyone to love me. It says, I'll appreciate those who choose me and I'll respect those who don't. That mindset changes every relationship you'll ever have, because people can reject your invitation, they can reject your attention, they can reject a relationship, but they should never have the power to make you reject yourself. And that is where real strength begins. We've talked about recognizing your value and refusing to chase one-sided relationships, but the next lesson goes even deeper, because sometimes the most powerful message you'll ever send isn't spoken at all. Sometimes silence says everything words never could. Reason number 3, silence reveals what constant chasing never can. Most people believe every problem needs another conversation, another explanation, another apology, another chance to prove themselves. But here's what many emotionally mature people eventually learn. Not every situation becomes clearer with more words. Sometimes it becomes clearer with silence. Think about what usually happens during an emotional argument. Both people become defensive. Neither person feels heard. Each sentence becomes louder than the last. Instead of understanding each other, both people start trying to win, and when winning becomes more important than understanding, the relationship begins to lose something essential: respect. Now imagine a different response. Instead of sending 10 more messages, you stop. Instead of trying to convince someone to value you, you step back. Instead of arguing for hours, you give the situation room to breathe. That silence isn't punishment, it's space. And space has a remarkable way of revealing the truth. When the noise disappears, people's actions become impossible to ignore. Does she reach out because she genuinely values the connection? Does she take responsibility for her part? Does she show curiosity about how you're doing? Or does nothing change at all? That's valuable information, because actions are always more reliable than promises. Anyone can say, I care about you. Anyone can promise, I'll do better. But consistent behavior is what builds trust. Silence allows behavior to speak. This isn't about giving someone the silent treatment. Those are two very different things. The silent treatment is used to punish or control another person. Healthy space is used to regulate emotions. Think clearly and avoid saying things you'll regret. One comes from manipulation. The other comes from maturity. There's another reason silence is powerful. It protects your emotional energy. Every unanswered message, every repeated argument, every attempt to convince someone of your worth costs something. Your attention, your peace, your confidence, your time. Eventually you have to ask yourself, is this conversation helping us grow? Or am I simply repeating myself because I'm afraid to let go? Strong men don't avoid difficult conversations. They have them when they're necessary. They communicate honestly. They listen. They apologize when they're wrong. They try to solve problems together. But they also recognize when communication has turned into endless persuasion. And persuasion is not the foundation of love. Mutual understanding is. Here's something worth remembering. People who genuinely value you rarely need to be convinced to treat you with basic respect. They may make mistakes. They may misunderstand you. They may even disappoint you. But they'll be willing to listen, to learn, to repair the relationship. That's what emotional maturity looks like. Silence also teaches you something about yourself. It shows whether your happiness depends on another person's response. Can you enjoy your day without checking your phone every 5 minutes? Can you continue working toward your goals even when life feels uncertain? Can you remain calm without immediate reassurance? Those questions matter, because confidence isn't measured by how quickly someone texts you back. It's measured by how steady you remain when life doesn't go according to plan. The strongest presence in any room usually belongs to the person who isn't desperate for attention, not because they don't care, but because they've learned that peace is more valuable than constant validation. Sometimes silence heals relationships. Sometimes it ends them. Either way, it reveals the truth much faster than endless chasing ever will. And once you finally see the truth, you face an even bigger opportunity, not to change someone else, but to rediscover the man you were before you started losing yourself trying to earn someone else's approval. Because that's where the next lesson begins. Reason number 4. Walking away gives you the chance to rediscover yourself. One of the greatest risks in an unhealthy relationship isn't losing another person. It's losing yourself. At first, the changes are almost invisible. You skip a workout because you're waiting for a reply. You cancel plans with friends because you're hoping she'll call. You stop working on your goals because your mind is consumed by the relationship. Little by little, your world becomes smaller. Your confidence becomes tied to someone else's attention. Your mood depends on how they treat you that day. Without realizing it, you've handed someone else the responsibility for your happiness. That's a heavy burden for any relationship. Healthy love should complement your life. It shouldn't replace it. Sometimes stepping away creates something incredibly valuable: perspective. For the first time in months, or even years, you begin asking questions that have nothing to do with the other person. What kind of man do I want to become? What goals have I been neglecting? What habits make me proud of myself? What relationships have I ignored? Those questions shift your focus from chasing approval to building character. You return to the gym. You invest in your career. You reconnect with friends and family. You read more. You sleep better. You develop skills. Most importantly, you start keeping promises to yourself again. And every promise you keep builds trust with the person you'll spend your entire life with, yourself. Real confidence isn't created overnight. It's earned through daily actions. Every workout you finish, every difficult conversation you handle with maturity, every healthy boundary you maintain, every goal you pursue even when no one is watching. These moments quietly rebuild your self-respect. Ironically, when your life becomes full of purpose again, you stop feeling the need to convince anyone to stay. Not because you've become cold, but because you've realized your identity is bigger than any single relationship. That doesn't mean love no longer matters. It means love becomes a choice instead of a necessity. The strongest relationships are formed by two people who each have a meaningful life of their own. They don't complete each other, they support each other's growth. Walking away from a situation that repeatedly damages your self-respect isn't the end of your story. For many men, it's the beginning of becoming someone they're genuinely proud to be. And once you begin rebuilding yourself, you'll notice something surprising. Your standards begin to change. You stop asking, how do I make someone value me? And you start asking, does this relationship reflect the values I want in my life? That single question can change every relationship you'll have from this point forward. Reason number 5. Higher standards lead to healthier relationships. After leaving a relationship where your effort wasn't appreciated, something begins to change. Not overnight, not without pain, but slowly. Your definition of love becomes healthier. You stop confusing attention with commitment. You stop confusing chemistry with compatibility. And most importantly, you stop believing that love requires sacrificing your self-respect. Many men think having standards means expecting perfection. It doesn't. Healthy standards aren't about finding someone who never makes mistakes. They're about recognizing the difference between occasional mistakes and repeated patterns. Everyone has bad days. Everyone misunderstands each other sometimes. Every relationship will face disagreements. But healthy relationships share one important quality. Both people are willing to grow. Both people take responsibility. Both people communicate honestly. Both people make an effort to repair problems instead of pretending they don't exist. That's what separates temporary attraction from lasting compatibility. Think about the friendships you value most. They're probably built on trust, respect, reliability, kindness. Healthy romantic relationships require those same qualities. Without them, attraction eventually fades beneath resentment. When your standards become healthier, you also become more patient. Not patient enough to tolerate disrespect, patient enough to wait for someone who shares your values. That changes everything. Instead of asking, how can I make this person choose me? You begin asking, Are we choosing each other equally? That's a far better question, because relationships aren't auditions. They're partnerships. You shouldn't have to earn basic respect. You shouldn't have to convince someone to communicate honestly. You shouldn't have to abandon your identity just to keep someone interested. Healthy love doesn't require constant uncertainty. It creates stability, not because everything is perfect, but because both people consistently choose respect over ego, growth over blame, communication over assumptions. One of the greatest benefits of raising your standards is that you become comfortable walking away from situations that no longer align with your values. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of wisdom. You realize that being alone for a season is healthier than staying in a relationship where your confidence slowly disappears. Solitude may feel uncomfortable, but losing yourself feels far worse. And here's something many people discover later in life. The quality of your relationships is often determined by the quality of the standards you refuse to compromise. When you respect yourself, you're more likely to attract people who respect you too, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you stop accepting what repeatedly damages your peace. Real confidence isn't saying, "I'll never get hurt again." Real confidence says, "If I do get hurt, I trust myself to make healthy decisions." That's emotional strength. It's knowing that your future doesn't depend on one relationship. It depends on the man you continue becoming every single day. And that's why walking away is never the final goal. The real goal is building a life so full of purpose, discipline, and character that any relationship becomes something that adds to your life, not something that defines your worth. Because when your life has purpose, your confidence no longer needs constant validation. It becomes something no one else can give you or take away. Reason number 6, peace is worth more than winning every argument. There comes a moment in every man's life when he realizes something important. Not every disagreement needs to become a battle. Not every criticism deserves a response. And not every relationship is meant to last. When we're younger, it's easy to believe that if we can just explain ourselves one more time, use the perfect words, or prove our intentions, everything will work out. Sometimes that's true. Honest communication can repair misunderstandings. A sincere apology can rebuild trust. A difficult conversation can strengthen a relationship. But only when both people are willing to participate. One person cannot create a healthy relationship alone. When every conversation becomes an argument, when every disagreement turns into blame, when every attempt to communicate ends with more confusion than clarity, you have to ask yourself an important question. Am I solving problems, or am I repeating the same cycle? Strong men don't avoid conflict. They simply choose conflict that has purpose. They'll fight for their values. They'll fight for their family. They'll fight for a relationship where both people are trying to grow. But they won't fight endlessly for someone's approval, because approval earned through exhaustion rarely becomes lasting respect. One of the greatest signs of emotional maturity is learning the difference between persistence and attachment. Persistence says, "This matters, so I'm willing to work through it." Attachment says, "I'll sacrifice my peace because I'm afraid to let go." Those two mindsets may look similar from the outside, but they lead to very different lives. Think about your daily energy. Every unnecessary argument, every sleepless night, every hour spent overthinking someone's mixed signals is time you'll never get back. Imagine investing that same energy somewhere else, improving your health, learning a new skill, growing your career, deepening your friendships, building financial stability, reading books that expand your perspective, developing discipline. Those investments continue paying dividends long after an argument is forgotten. That's why emotionally grounded people become increasingly protective of their peace, not because they don't care about others, but because they understand that peace is the foundation from which good decisions are made. When your mind is calm, you communicate better, you listen better, you think more clearly, you become less reactive and more intentional. That doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. It means refusing to let every emotion control your actions. Real strength isn't emotional numbness. It's emotional discipline. It's the ability to pause before reacting, to breathe before speaking, to choose wisdom over impulse. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to defend your worth to everyone who questions it. You don't have to remain in environments that consistently drain your confidence. Sometimes the strongest response is simply moving forward, quietly, respectfully, without resentment, because peace isn't something you find by controlling other people. It's something you create through the decisions you make every day. And once you begin protecting your peace, you discover something remarkable. Your confidence no longer depends on who stays, who leaves, or who finally recognizes your value. It comes from knowing that regardless of what life brings, You'll continue becoming a man of integrity, discipline, and self-respect. That's a kind of confidence no one can take away. Reason number 7. The greatest response is building a life you respect. There comes a moment after every disappointment when a man has a choice. He can spend months replaying conversations in his head, wondering what he should have said, trying to understand why someone failed to appreciate his effort, or he can make a different decision. He can invest that same energy into becoming stronger, because the most powerful response to rejection isn't proving someone wrong. It's proving to yourself that your future doesn't depend on one person's opinion. Every hour you spend learning a valuable skill, every workout you complete, every promise you keep to yourself, every difficult day you push through, you're rebuilding something far more valuable than anyone's validation. You're rebuilding your identity. Strong men don't become confident because life always goes their way. They become confident because they know they'll continue growing regardless of what happens. Ironically, this mindset changes every relationship. When you no longer fear losing people, you stop acting from desperation. You communicate more honestly. You respect boundaries. You become more patient. You become more emotionally stable because your happiness is no longer resting on someone else's choices. It's built on your own character. People naturally respect those who respect themselves, not because they're trying to impress anyone, but because confidence is difficult to ignore. Real confidence is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in discipline, in consistency, in integrity, and over time those qualities become impossible to fake. The goal was never to make another person regret losing you. The goal was always to become a man you're proud to be. Because when you become that man, no rejection can define you, no disappointment can destroy you, and no relationship becomes the center of your identity. Your purpose becomes bigger than your pain, your discipline becomes stronger than your emotions, and your future becomes brighter than your past. That's what real strength looks like. Final message. Let's bring everything together. The strongest men don't waste their lives trying to convince someone to see their value. They don't beg for attention. They don't chase people who have already stopped investing. And they don't sacrifice their character just to avoid being alone. Instead, they make a different choice. They choose self-respect over desperation, growth over resentment, purpose over obsession, peace over constant conflict. Every disappointment becomes a lesson. Every setback becomes fuel. Every rejection becomes an opportunity to become wiser, stronger, and more disciplined. Because confidence isn't built when everything goes your way. Confidence is built when life challenges you and you continue moving forward anyway. Remember this, not every relationship is meant to last. Not every connection is meant to become permanent. Sometimes people enter your life to teach you what standards you should never lower again. And that's not failure. That's growth. The man who keeps improving never truly loses. He gains experience. He gains wisdom. He gains emotional strength. He gains clarity about the kind of people he wants in his life. The goal was never to make someone feel guilty for not choosing you. The goal is to become a man whose happiness isn't controlled by someone else's decision. When your confidence comes from your habits, when your peace comes from your values, when your purpose becomes bigger than your relationships, you stop living from fear. You start living with freedom. And freedom creates confidence, so protect your peace, protect your standards, protect your character, continue building your body, continue developing your mind, continue strengthening your discipline, continue becoming the kind of man who inspires respect, not because he demands it, but because he lives it every single day. Because at the end of the day, the greatest victory isn't changing someone else's opinion, it's becoming someone you're proud to see in the mirror. If this video gave you a new perspective, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week we create videos about psychology, masculinity, confidence, discipline, self-improvement, communication, and healthy relationships to help you become the strongest version of yourself. If you watched until the end, comment, "I choose self-respect," and tell us which lesson resonated with you the most. If this video added value to your life, share it with someone who is committed to becoming a better man. Until next time, stay disciplined, stay confident, keep improving, and remember, the strongest man in the room isn't the one who controls other people. It's the one who has learned to master himself.